You're listening to Building the Broncos with Nick Kendell and Carl Dumler, Broncos country's leading draft and scouting analysts. Head on over to milehighhuddle.com to sound off on all things Broncos.
Hello there, Broncos country, and it is once again time for another episode of Building the Broncos. I am your host, Carl Dumler, and with me, as always, I have my co-host and good friend, Mr. Nick Kendell. Nick, we are in the frigid cold once again here in the Midwest. Did you wake up to snow this morning?
Oh, yeah. It was starting to snow last night. I was up decently late last night because after the exciting Cowboys and Minnesota game, obviously scouting the enemy for next week, the Rick and Morty season premiere started, and I'm basic and wanted to watch it. So it was a good premiere and got back, and that means I'm asleep by midnight, which kind of throws off the week. Didn't get my workout in this morning. Going to go do that after we're done recording here. But, doing well, and despite the snow.
I wanted to pass on a compliment to you.
Oh.
I had somebody ask me to ask you if you realized that you look like Joe Burrow.
Oh, that's he's a good looking dude.
I know, he's a handsome man.
So that's if I could look like, I need to keep lifting, keep losing that weight. I'm still, that body training going on here. Honestly, I'm starting to think about endurance and core exercises and leg exercises for the wife and I's next big backpacking trip. Can't start those too soon, especially if they're going to be at altitude.
Right.
So parents got us a year-long parks pass. Not sure exactly what we're going to do, but potentially backpacking trip in like the Tetons or Glacier or Colorado. So we've done them before, never at super altitude before. I mean, did it at Mount Hood, did it in Olympic, but that's not hiking at, over 10,000 feet. So I'm in better shape than I've been since like high school, so it shouldn't be as big of an issue, but that's where I'm starting to turn my focus.
There you go. All right. Well, the next Joe Burrow right here on this show.
Hopefully I can get paid like that someday.
Yeah, I know. Exactly. But no, for things like that, you can find us on Twitter because we like to have those kind of comments out there. You can comment if you think that Nick looks like Joe Burrow. Look at his wedding pictures, where he's that handsome man in the suit looking all sharp. But you can find me on Twitter at Carl Dumler MHH, and of course Nick at Nick Kendell MHH. And you can find the podcast Twitter account at BTB Football Pod. And make sure you subscribe to our show and leave us a rating as we value your input. You can find the show on iTunes, Stitcher, and even that of YouTube. Also make sure you head on over to milehighhuddle.com, a new affiliate of the Maven Coalition and Sports Illustrated. Also know that this podcast is powered by Overtime Media.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
All right, Nick. Well, our last episode, we kind of did our award show for the mid-season point of the year. And I'm kind of excited to see how much changes from now to the end of the season when we maybe redo those awards. Are they going to still have a lot of the same names, or is it going to be different? So we'll go get to that point eventually. But some things that we didn't really get much of a chance to talk about would involve especially the coaching staff. And just kind of looking at this team and where are they in the building of this team for the future. And so let's start just with Fangio right off the bat. I mean, head guy, new guy that came in, the old new guy, I guess you could say. I mean, they love to advertise every single game that he's like the third oldest coach to ever be hired for the first time. Is that right?
I believe it's definitely up there. You don't typically see the elderly, especially defensive statesmen, get their first shot this late. So, it's the Broncos kind of zigged when everyone else is zagging, and that means that they're not really trending with everybody else, but you kind of can get a better resource on that defensive side. So, I have no issues with Fangio. There's been some talk that maybe some of the veterans don't really love the schedule so much, having Monday, quote unquote, off when those players have to come in for treatment anyways, means that you're not having a day off during the week, really. Like it's a 7-day work week during the season. But, the younger guys don't know any different. And as long as the defense keeps being great and the team is playing hard, which have been doing outside that KC game, which God blast that game into outer space. But other than that, got no real complaints with Fangio this season, considering first-time head coach and everything like that.
Right. I mean, he's made his mistakes.
Yeah.
I think there's been a couple games that really got, especially there at the end, a couple of decisions here and there. There's a couple, I would say, challenges that I would question, why in the world are you challenging this? But beyond that, I mean, I've really enjoyed watching the transition of the defense. I mean, how he's gotten that mix of players to play like they are is just incredible. And you have a couple of them that are playing at truly an all-pro level. You have some guys that, I mean, we talked about in our last episode of Derek Wolfe. I mean, this guy has reinvented his career and looking like a true playmaker that needs to come back to the Broncos team. And I don't know. I guess there's times where I question a little bit just with his press conferences that he's almost too mean, I guess. That's not really a way to put it. Like, a player will do something good and he's just like, yeah, they did all right.
Yeah.
I guess I've always been big on, like, okay, when there's times to be critical, but when there's times of praise, make sure to give that praise. Like, eventually that kind of wears on a player of whatever I do, I still can't get anything from the coach. But I don't know. I mean, just like I said, that's just something little. But beyond that, I love what he's doing. I think he's a smart guy. I think he's very detail oriented. Like I said, the team's getting better and are getting better at some of the smaller details that they weren't earlier in the season. But he definitely deserves another year. Should we just start there?
Oh, yeah. I definitely think he deserves another year as well. I don't think that's much of a question. The brakes have not completely fallen off. This bust this season, they've had some close losses. You could argue that they should have won the game against the Colts, the Jags, or the Bears. But they could have easily have lost the game. I mean, that Browns game they could have lost, and that Chargers game. So, it does feel like this is going in the right direction. The defense is playing better and better. And, you really need continuity here. You can't have 4 head coaches in 5 different seasons. So, barring something catastrophic, Fangio will be back this season.
Right.
Or next season, excuse me.
There you go. All right, well, let's switch then to maybe the most...
I do want to ask you, actually, what is the best thing that you think that he's brought so far this season, and what is the most head-scratching thing? Whether it be a single decision or something that he's elevated or lowered.
I think the best thing he's brought is, I guess, back an identity for this team. Like last year, it was supposed to be about the defense, but the defense wasn't that great.
Yeah.
And the offense was downright terrible. And I mean, while the offense is still struggling this year, at least you have an identity on defense of, again, being a top 5 defense in the NFL and really kind of bringing that true, like I said, he said that we're going to be a death by inches kind of team. And I think you're starting to see a lot of that. Like there were a lot of struggles early on. There were a lot of miscues and things like that, but you're seeing guys who are not missing tackles. You see guys who are giving that full effort, and like I said, only minus the Chiefs game. I mean, let's just put on our blinders and say that one was an anomaly on this season. But beyond that, they've been pretty competitive, even against some pretty decent teams so far this year. So I really appreciate that. The head-scratching thing, I guess, is a little bit just with this whole quarterback situation. And you can't put that all on him because Elway's been a part of it. Scangarella's been a part of it. I mean, everybody's been a part of this whole decision, but it's just kind of a weird, I don't know. Why did you wait so long on Locke? I know like they were talking, well, we're still playoff bound. We're still trying to fight for that. And so maybe we'll leave him on IR all season, but I don't know. The whole thing was just handled really terribly to the point where they might still leave him on IR this year. I don't know. I'm still wondering what the heck's going on with some of that.
Yeah, I definitely wonder how much that is Fangio, and maybe there's some pressures above him that are forcing some stuff there. There's obviously, talked about it with Chad and Zach last night, there's a lot of different power structures in place and people different pulling for different things, so it kind of balances out somewhat in the end, but there's a little bit of questioning there for me. I guess my biggest question mark with Fangio is, why starting off Shelby Harris at nose tackle and not playing that true nose tackle when, Shelby Harris really never had that. I never thought he had that skill set to play that 0-1 technique. And even more questioning, you had A.J. Johnson, who's been playing great this season when he's been given a chance, knew the system, knew the scheme, was there all of training camp preseason, and then you start Corey Nelson over him for the first 2.5 weeks. That just, I don't understand that one.
Yeah, that makes sense. The other thing I'd question a little bit is just some of the in-game play calling on both sides of the ball. Just seemed like there's a lot of times where they really went to a true like 3-man rush. Let's drop everybody back in coverage. And while it's worked some, that is still one of my least favorite calls that any coach makes. It just seems to work less times than not. I think of that Chiefs game against Titans where they did a 2-man rush. And the Chiefs got themselves into field goal range because, of course, Mahomes can dance around. And, Titans kind of got lucky there at the end on a couple things. But, yeah, so, like I said, there's been some rookie mistakes that I've seen from this guy. But beyond that, I think overall you have to look at this as a plus look, I guess, for the Broncos this year. Because, we're going to talk about it here just a little bit of how much of this was really truly a transition year. Were they really playoff bound, all those kind of things. And you and I agreed that it was more of a transition year. And so I've liked at least that we've seen growth from this team from the beginning of the season to what they are now. I think they're a better team now than they were day one. And that's usually a pretty good sign that coaching is taking place.
Yeah. Nope. I'm in agreement with you there. So I guess moving on now, Scangarello, a guy who's been up and down and one that our colleague Eric Trickle has been very critical of, and there's been some reports of some questionable play calling and scheme design and whatnot, and what the quarterback is allowed to do structurally. But coming off that game with Brandon Allen, probably his best, undoubtedly Scangarello's best performance to date, and now has a week to prepare for 2 great defenses in the Vikings and the Bills. So we'll see what happens from there. But thoughts on Scangarello so far?
I think you're seeing, again, a guy that's still trying to figure out what he's doing on the field, how to call a game. I think Flacco was a terrible pairing with him, but I also think he did not do himself any favors in the way that he was calling games for Flacco. And to me, I saw this argument earlier today that I thought was really very, very interesting, that they were talking about Sean McVay versus Kyle Shanahan. And how last year, of course, Sean McVay is that next great coach that everybody's talking about, of how great his system is, how great of an offensive coordinator, all those kind of things, where this year that offense is struggling. And they said that they think that one of the biggest differences between Kyle Shanahan and Sean McVay is Kyle Shanahan's ability to adjust to the players that he has. And right now, I don't think Scangarello has done a great job of adjusting his system to fit his players. Now, I do think now with Brandon Allen and possibly Drew Lock, they fit better the system that he wants to run. And so we're going to have a better picture of what he can do moving forward. But, if we're judging on what he's done this season, I think he has done a lot of square peg, round hole kind of situations. Now, Flacco deserves plenty of flack for what he did on the field. See what I did there?
I did.
Dad joke. No. But beyond that, both of them deserve a lot of blame for what was going on in the offense. And so it was very frustrating to watch at times where you're just going, what are you calling? That does not work in that situation, and it's not great for Flacco. A lot of the bootleg plays, Flacco's just, his athleticism has gone way downhill.
Do you remember when they tried to sell us that BS narrative that, Flacco's a much better athlete than you think?
It was pretty easy to see that he's about as big of a statue in the NFL as there is.
Yeah.
And I didn't expect that Flacco would show so little pocket presence.
Yeah.
As he's done. Maybe that got masked so much because the offensive line there in Baltimore was obviously much better than what the Broncos have. Yeah. And so that helped out, obviously, but it's still frustrating to see how Flacco handled some of that. And then on top of that, then some of the play calling, you're going, this is frustrating. I think of the worst that I can remember was the goal line 3 straight passes. That was the worst that I've seen out of Scangarello this year.
Yeah.
And I understand you maybe want to try to catch them off guard because they're expecting run, but it just felt like that I'm going to force this. It's going to work because I know I'm smarter than you kind of thing. And in the grand scheme of things, he's still a rookie that's trying to figure things out. It's that high schooler that thinks they know everything, and then they get out in the world and go, oh, maybe I don't. And so, again, I want to judge more on what he can do now that he has quarterbacks that fit into his system. So I do expect better things moving forward.
Yeah, and I know there's been some talk, why don't the Broncos bring in a more modernized system? But we're seeing this system work in the NFL. It's taken time, and obviously there's a difference between the scheme and play calling. They have to go hand in hand, but those are two different things. So need to watch for that. But I don't really have an issue with the scheme itself. Just going to take a little bit of time, and like you said, Flacco's inability to avoid pressure, along with the Broncos' probably bottom 7 off pass blocking level offensive line, you're going to have issues there. So, kind of still a to be determined grade with Cangarello, but good to see signs of life in that last game. And I guess Donatel, I'll go first here. How much of it is Fangio? How much of it is Donatel? And that's a question worth asking. But what Donatel, I think, is done specifically with the secondary, guys like Devontae Harris, Duke Dawson, and the safeties, Kareem Jackson converting from cornerback to safety full time, and Justin Simmons this season. Tip of the cap to Donatel. He's doing really good. And again, how much is Fangio? How much is Donatel? Can't say, but Donatel is a defensive backs coach. And a lot of these defensive backs, especially these bargain bin finds they're doing, that they've been relying on, have been doing pretty well. So, I think Donatel is doing well.
Yeah, I think you're right. We have to almost judge him more on what the secondary is doing than what the entire defense is doing. And really, he has done such an incredible job of finding the strengths of the players and putting them in a place of strength. Yeah. And I mean, that's something that we saw last year. Too many times the Broncos were moving guys around just because they felt like they had to. And I appreciated with the Broncos, especially Kareem Jackson. How easy would it have been for them to move him back to cornerback when all those injuries started showing up?
I thought they were. I thought they would.
I did too. But they decided, you know what? This is his perfect position. We need to leave him in a position of strength. I mean, he's a top 5 safety this year, according to PFF. I think he's 3rd right now in the NFL. Justin Simmons is 1st. And so when that's a position of strength, to move him to something that he might not be as good at, but because you have injuries, and that's what we saw with Justin Simmons last year. Yeah. They had injuries, and so they panicked and moved him to a position that he wasn't as comfortable in. And so, again, this is just that coaching staff saying, okay, we're going to trust that we can coach up these other guys, but we're going to leave the other guys where they know how to play. And it's the same with so many times how many people have sat there and said that the Broncos need to move offensive linemen around. And moving from the left side to the right side or right side to the left side, it's not as easy as it sounds.
No. It's like learning how to wipe your butt with the opposite hand, as they say. Offensive line coaches like to say that. That's just, just because it's graphic enough. It's like, right. You can do it, but this doesn't feel right, Right. So, unless your name is Tristan Wirfs, then you can move anywhere. But no, that's for another day. So, no, I agree. I think Donatel's done a great job. Glad that he decided to stick with Fangio. And those two paired together, it's just like peanut butter and jelly. Just goes perfect together. Yeah. All right, well, moving on now. Something we want to talk about here. It's something we've been screaming and obviously trying to drum up fan support and excitement. You never want to have cold water tossed or thrown on you to begin the season, but as you and I have been always saying, it was going to be a transition this season. So, what do you think about this transition so far? What are you seeing through the first 9 games that A, support that, and B, show that this transition is heading in the right direction?
Well, I would say the biggest thing that you're seeing is they are willing to put young players that could be part of the future into a position and seeing what they can do.
Except maybe one that's been probably the most important to find out about.
Yeah, and so we'll see how. I would say let's wait until the end of the season before we fully judge that whole situation.
Yeah, good call.
If we get to the end of the year and we haven't seen Locke one bit, and they still sit there and say we don't know exactly what we have, then I'm going to really be frustrated with the decisions that they've made. But beyond that, like I said, they've stuck in a lot of other young guys and seen what they have. And a lot of guys have stepped up to show that they're going to be a part of this future. And I appreciated that they were willing to, especially at the wide receiver position, let's see what we got. Move on from Sanders because he's not going to be a part of our future. And let's see what we can do. Now, I actually liked the fact that they kept Chris Harris, because I do think he could be a part of the future of this team still.
Yeah.
Where Sanders, it was, I think, a foregone conclusion. This guy's gone.
That was somebody that had requested out as well.
Right.
Obliging his
exactly.
requests.
And I think that they've done a great job of showing, okay, we are a young team. Let's get the young guys in there, get them experience. And yes, they're going to make mistakes along the way, but let's see what they can do and see them grow as the season goes. So I do think that they've done a pretty good job of setting this up for the future, of setting up a lot of these guys getting a lot of experience on the field that maybe if the Broncos really truly were right now trying for the playoffs, they wouldn't be getting.
Yeah. I definitely agree with you. I do see the transition more so with the defense. They really do seem to be coming into their own. Granted, Chris Harris Jr. not having the best game against the Browns and Odell Beckham Jr., which, I mean, he's going to get his. He's one of the top 5 most talented wide receivers in football. But, that's one concern there. Chris Harris Jr., the depth at cornerback, and also, the guy opposite Derek Wolfe or replacing Derek Wolfe. That's another area there are some concerns. But overall, I think the transition on defense, especially with what we're seeing at linebacker and safety, with the steps forward there, really are a sign of good things to come. But obviously, the defense could still use a little bit of a shot in the arm and some more talent. But bringing back Bradley Chubb next year will help get that off in the right direction. So is there anything you would have done differently, coaching-wise, everything that's going on in hindsight? I guess, for me, the biggest one we already touched on, but not playing Corey Nelson, probably sticking with a guy who knows the scheme better in A.J. Johnson would probably be a direction I would go. Maybe also pulling the carpet out from Yadam a little earlier for Bosby, just because Yadam was obviously sinking. But other than that, I can't think of anything too much off the top of my head. Maybe get Fant more involved in the pass game.
Yeah, and I think they were a little limited, obviously, with the offensive line to get Fant involved. And this is why having that athletic quarterback makes a difference, because you can't rush the same. And so it allows Fant to get more down the field and use his athleticism to make plays. And so I'm excited to see him. I mean, the whole lock situation is, to me, a little bit crazy. You have this guy healthy, and I saw a stat earlier today. Do you know how many quarterbacks have started this year?
I think it's 51.
51. Yep, you're right. And so you're almost there, about 2 per team. You're starting to get close to that. And so to me, having a backup quarterback that at some point you could bring in because you think that he could be your future is more important than, say, a running back that, as much as I do think he is a better player than Booker, I don't think he's so much better that he deserves to get that IR designation above Drew Lock.
Yeah.
Especially when you're looking at the backup quarterback situation and where the Broncos are now. You're going Brandon Allen. This guy against second and third string players in preseason looked terrible. And so that's a little bit for me. Just the whole delay thing just seems so crazy. And I'm just really trying to figure out what's all going on with that. Like I said, you can't fully judge it until the end of the year. If he still gets 4 or 5 games at the end of the year, then that's plenty to evaluate. But, I don't know. For the most part, with the talent that's on this team, I think they're about where they should be.
All right. Well, that all sounds good. So I guess anything that you're looking for, both offensively and defensively, why fans should be optimistic with the direction of this team and things to look forward to in the second half. 3-6. Broncos aren't technically out of the playoffs yet, but, probably not going to go on a run and make the playoffs this season. That's just kind of how it is. So what are things to look forward to in this post-bye week landscape for, things to build upon in a transition season?
I think the best thing that you can take notice of, it really is that the top players this year are the young guys. I mean, you still have Von Miller, you still have Chris Harris, and yes, they're still making plays and things like that. But really, you got Justin Simmons, Alexander Johnson, Cortland Sutton. Now you got Noah Fant, who's starting to look like he's starting to emerge. And so you've got all these young pieces that you can really build around. Your core is no longer all these veterans that have been in the league for 10 years. Like the Broncos have been trying to hold on to that that Super Bowl window, and obviously that kind of fell off the rails. And as much as people say, blow this whole thing up, really the Broncos, I think, are the 10th youngest roster in the NFL. And a lot of their, like I said, their core pieces are the young guys. When Bradley Chubb gets back, he's a young core piece for this team. That's going to be huge moving forward that you can build around. And so other than really Von Miller, and I guess you could say Kareem Jackson is a little bit older as well. But beyond those guys, you mostly got a young core of players already established. And if you can just add another great draft and free agency class around these guys, and maybe, I mean, it still comes down to that quarterback position. But if you get even an above average quarterback with a good group around him, good things can happen. So, I mean, it does seem like it's finally getting on track of moving forward to better things.
All right. Well, I think we should probably take another break here. We will be right back, folks. Don't go anywhere. This is Building the Broncos.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
Alrighty, and we are back on the Building the Broncos podcast. I am Nick Kendell, along with Carl Dumler. Carl, bye week. We're going to look at this offseason in the hindsight. So let's start off on a positive note. The best signing of the entire offseason was?
The best signing, I'm going to go Kareem Jackson.
Okay.
Like I said, he's rated third best safety in football by PFF. And I know we make fun of PFF a lot on this show, but it matches up with what you're seeing.
Make fun of is the wrong term.
Okay.
I'd say we question the validity of the grades themselves.
Okay,
and
there
how
you go.
Inconsistent they are.
Right.
So, because PFF, I mean, like the counting stats and everything is good, but there's some questions about the integrity of the grades themselves and just how they analyze their data to create these grades. So there's a fair amount of subjectiveness in it.
Right.
And that's fine, but I think that's worth calling out. So, sorry, I just wanted to have a little sidebar there. I'm not being paid by PFF to say this.
Oh, you're not?
But if they want to pay me to say something, then by gosh, I will stand for these grades.
But no, it's one of those times where your eyes match up with the grade. The guy is one of the best tackling safeties I've seen in a long time. He's not the biggest hitter, but he's a sure tackler. And I saw something earlier. They were talking about running plays over 20 yards. And usually when a running play goes for over 20 yards, it's with a safety missing a tackle.
Or a bad angle.
Right, or a bad angle. And Kareem Jackson is just one of the best at knowing when to come down, when to attack a hole, to get through all of the mess that's going on a running play. And on top of that, he's actually pretty darn good in coverage too. And so he has just been such a huge piece for this team, for that safety group, and just really solidifying that secondary and just giving them a true chess piece that they can move around wherever they need him, and he can still be a very, very good player for him. So I love that signing, and it's just paid off dividends so far this year. What about you?
Well, I had a couple here that I wanted to throw to some honorable mentions, just some guys that kind of came out of the defense, whether they were Mike Purcell being one that showed out decently in preseason and earned a spot, made this team, and is now playing pretty well. So good signing there. And also Devontae Harris, who was on the Cincinnati Bengals, I believe was a 5th or 6th round pick in the 2018 draft. Didn't make their squad this year. Broncos, tip of the hat to the NFL scouts as well as probably the college scouts as well, that Illinois State guy in Devontae Harris, and bringing him on and him coming on. I mean, there's some questions about his game, and we're going to find out more, I'm sure, as the season progresses, but considering he was cut by the gosh darn horrific Bengals and is coming over here and playing decent is, tip of the cap, and that's a good signing. But I'm going to go with a guy who I think is a little bit underrated. And does he have the biggest role on this team? Is he the most impactful player positionally or anything like that? No, not really. But I'm going to go Deontay Spencer. Age 27 overall. He's been pretty good this season. He's had 21 punt returns and 172 yards, about 8.2 yards per return, which is solid with a 42-yard long. And then only 4 kick returns, but 29 yards per return as well there, and it's average, or the longest of 60. So because playing at Denver and just how many good legs there are, as well as the changes in special teams and kickoff coverages and the rules there, you're not going to see as many kick returns. But I think Deontay Spencer has been pretty good there, and I am very interested to see his role going forward, because while Deshaun Hamilton is the guy that's getting the second most snaps for the wide receivers, with Cortland Sutton being number one, obviously. Spencer is providing a speed role with pre-snap motion and has out-targeted Deshaun Hamilton in the last 2 games as well. So Deontay Spencer, I think he was a good signing. Obviously, this isn't exactly what you want. Kareem Jackson is far and away number one. But you have some other lower-tier guys here, and I think Deontay Spencer deserves a shout-out in the very least.
Yeah, it's been interesting, the snap counts that they've given to their wide receivers.
Yeah.
And like I said, Hamilton has gotten the majority since Sanders left. But you also look at the 2 weeks ago, Fred Brown was second on the team in snaps at wide receiver. And then this last week, Deontay Spencer was in for 50% of the snaps, where the week before that he was only in for 10%. And so it is kind of a scheme game type thing of how can we try to beat these guys. I do want to see a little bit more Winfrey moving forward at the wide receiver position. But you're right. Spencer has been kind of that nice, I'd say, spark that every once in a while has really had that nice big play. And at least he's not had the really absolutely terrible play. I mean, he had the bad fumble as a receiver in this last game, but that was kind of a weird, he was bent backwards. I don't completely blame him for that one, but I mean, he still fumbled. But beyond that, he's been very, very short hands for a returner, which, I mean, that's number one. And for the Broncos, that's been a huge concern for the last few years. So to at least have that has been really nice. And then on top of that, he does have that speed to get around the edge and make a big play. And so the Broncos at least have that nice little spark and something they can work with. And if they add another weapon to the offense, I would love to see that player going deep and then Spencer doing the
pre-snap motion kind of stuff.
Right. And doing some screen plays where you have to worry about going deep, but you also have to worry about the screen game at the same time. I mean, that just makes things that much more difficult for a team. So he's a nice piece to keep around and has definitely done his job as a returner. But let's switch to the other side now. The worst signing of this season.
Well, for me, it's going to be Bryce Callahan. There were concerns out there with the foot. Was he going to be able to play this season at the level he had in the past? Is that foot injury going to keep him out there? And, I mean, how long is he going to be able to stay out there with that foot injury? There's some concerns it was chronic and would limit his playing time going forward and his effectiveness. And so far, haven't seen him. His foot was reportedly stepped on in the Broncos scrimmage against themselves at the stadium that re-aggravated something. And there's a lot of little bones in your foot that have different blood supply issues. So if you break a bone deep in your foot, sometimes there can be a lot of issues with recovery there. But so far it's been all bad. Apparently he is going to practice tomorrow, but I am very skeptical that we see him this season. I expect that they're going to throw him out there and say, yep, you are not good to go, and then throw him on IR later. But we'll see. We'll see if he can go. I know that there's some compensatory pick formula there as well that maybe the Broncos will decide to not move on from Callahan because of it. I think they have a comp pick that can turn from a 6th to a 5th. If Callahan doesn't play, I think actually it's after week 11 he can play and it wouldn't matter. So they could move up to the 5th, but obviously the comp pick formula is secret, so you can't say that definitively. But Callahan's been a disappointment and the worst in hindsight, and probably the signing I was the most skeptical of as well. So gonna take my victory lap there and say, yep, I think that was a poor signing.
And I think the other hard part about this is the fact that it's just been one of those nagging injuries that he kept a roster spot, but yet hasn't practiced.
Yep. And it's got to be hurting your special teams. Right.
And so, I mean, you think about that roster spot of who else could they have kept? Maybe one of the injured guys that would have come back a little bit faster. And they're not having to worry about some of these things that are going on now of who to bring back, all that. Or like I said, maybe somebody for special teams that would have been a better player for the team. I don't know. It just there's been a lot of frustrations with that whole injury, and it's not all on him, but it's still, the team knew that there was issues coming in, and then it's just played out pretty much. And so that brings me to my guy that's kind of had the same thing, Juwan James. You've gotten, I think, 41 snaps this year.
If that.
for $13 million. Not great.
No, not what you want, as they say.
And those 40 snaps have been beautiful. I mean, you see the potential. You see why the Broncos wanted to bring this guy in. But the fact that he can't stay healthy, can't stay on the field, and right now it already sounds like they're sitting there saying, we don't even know if he's going to practice this week. And like every time with these injuries, it just seems like they sit there and say, okay, well, he's getting close, but no, we don't know. And then they miss another week and then another week. It's like, how can they be getting close and then keep missing another month? And so it has been frustrating with those two guys just to take up so much cap space and produce so little. And like I said, those guys could have been IR'd. And I mean, I think James will come back at some point this year. And maybe Callahan will too. I'm with you. I think they'll eventually just IR him. And I mean, even if he's healthy, he's not in football shape. You can't run with a foot that's hurting. And so it's going to take him another month just to get back into football shape once he starts practicing. So it's really just, the whole situation is just very frustrating to see. Hopefully both of them can get healthy and be contributors next year, but I'm not going to hold my breath.
Doubt. However, the thing to know about Juwan James is he's always injured in these odd years and then healthy in the even years. So not going to play this year, probably. No, we'll see him at some point, but 2020 he's going to be good. And either way with the contract, 2020 they're probably going to be stuck with him either way. So I guess hope for the best there, but it's kind of getting pretty frustrating. It's frustrating to also know that, like, you know, not only would he be their most talented tackle, but also you could hold Bowles more accountable, and just the depth that it took on the offensive line. You know, maybe you see Wilkinson at right guard instead of Leary, who is dealing with injury as well. So it's definitely a concern. But no, what can you do? That's hindsight. So I guess the offseason coming up here, we're going to shift our focus. Instead of looking back, we'll look forward. Who are you prioritizing out of the Broncos right now that are set to be free agents that you want to bring back? And if you have a contract framework that you'd like to give them?
So, I mean, Justin Simmons has to be number one on everybody's list. If he's not, then you need to reevaluate. Like I said, he's graded out as the top safety. He's been a perfect marriage with Fangio. Just looks like a guy that's still even just beginning to scratch the surface of what he could bring to this defense. And you surround him with a team, a better team, and an offense that can score points, that gives him more opportunities for turnovers. I think this guy could just really go from a well-known Bronco to a well-known NFL player. And so when I'm looking at the framework for a contract for him, he's playing like a top 5 safety. And so you got to pay him like a top 5 safety. And he's one of those guys, he's young, he's worth paying. And so I'm looking at a deal in the 4-year, $58 million framework. That's about $14.5 million a year. That would put him top 2 at the safety position.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very, very fair deal for, again, what he's showing on the field. He hasn't missed a snap since he came into the league. Is that right?
I believe that is right.
And so he's been everything that you've wanted, especially this year. And so I'm willing to dish out top money for a guy like that. I guess who would be your next one then after Justin Simmons?
For me, it's tied right now between the opportunity cost and scarcity / youth. And that would be Derek Wolfe. Opportunity, I think you can get a player who's playing some of his best football on a deal that is below market value, and a guy who sets the type of culture that you want in the locker room. You know, guys who, you know, Bill Collar will point to them and say, hey, young kid, do everything like him and you're going to be fine in this league. You know, Derek Wolfe is a Bronco through and through. He wants to be here, and I think through the years of suckage that we've gone through the past few seasons, there's value in that. There's something to be said about somebody who wants to be here, you know, beyond, you know, getting that money, doing their job, and getting out. This dude breeds the Broncos, and that has value to me, especially when it's in tandem with how good his tape is. The other one would be Connor McGovern. McGovern has played okay this season, you know, probably an average center. Some people think he's better at guard. I think I'm probably liking him a little bit better at center with more experience, but that's just me. I think the issues he's had at guard with elite pass rushers, I haven't seen that so much at center, where he can kind of work more in tandem and use that athleticism to get up to the second level. But, you know, we saw with Billy Turner last year, he was the guy I advocated for first last offseason saying you need to re-sign this guy because he's going to, A, he's young and improving. B, he's versatile, so he can play multiple positions. And C, just the scarcity of offensive line. And I'll even throw in a D in there. Continuity on the offensive line is so important. You can't have a good offensive line if you're rotating in 2-3 new guys every season. So if this offensive line is going to be better next year, I really think signing Connor McGovern is probably the first step you have to take. Obviously, the moving on from Bulls is the most important, but that probably comes to the draft. So re-signing McGovern, I think, is very important. And I guess I'm going to throw it to you. I didn't list CHJ, Chris Harris Jr. there. It's easier to always type CHJ instead of typing it or saying Chris Harris Jr. But I didn't list him here. What are your thoughts on him?
It really is going to come down to the contract. If he's wanting top cornerback money, I can't justify that at his age. I know he's only 30, but it's still, I can't get to $15 million.
Yeah.
Now, if he sticks at the $12 million that he's at right now, maybe a 2-year, $24 million deal, I could get behind something like that because I still think he has 2 years of pretty good quarterback play. And I don't want it to make another hole that this team has to go out and fill in some way. But I'm also not going to sit here. I know he wants to go get big money, from what I understand. And if he's really wanting to go out there and get that big money, I'm not sure the Broncos are the team to give it to him.
Yeah.
So I'd hate to see him go, and I really hope they can get something worked out. But I also don't want to – I mean, I've seen the statistics. When a cornerback hits age 30 – I mean, most positions you start seeing a lot of decline. But with cornerbacks, it's a quick decline. You think about Champ Bailey. I mean, one of the best cornerbacks to ever play the game. And he went from, like, true competing for all pros to all of a sudden, like, can he even play in this league in, like, about a year and a half?
He had a lower body injury, though, that kind of really
he did.
kept him out, yeah.
But even there, you got to factor in a little bit of that with Chris Harris. Because he has had, 2 or 3 seasons where he's ended on IR?
Yes.
So I can't see that that's not going to get worse as he gets older.
Yeah, it's definitely a concern. I guess the big question is, with signing a guy like Chris Harris Jr., you have the potential for a safety transition. He played safety in college. He played... moved to cornerback in Denver, but is that something you think you could do to get some value for him? You know, like moving on. Obviously, we've just talked about how good Kareem Jackson has been, but you could move Chris Harris Jr. to safety after 2020, feasibly moving on from Kareem Jackson.
And if that's the plan, then that adds to his value for sure. And so maybe you do have him signed for a 2 or 3 year deal. And with that plan of moving him to safety eventually. And again, I want him to stay in Denver. I really do. And I think that there's a good chance that they're going to figure out something because I think he is a great fit for this system. And like I said, you don't want to make more holes than you have to for the offseason. But I also think the Broncos are probably not going to sit there and pay him as much as maybe another team will.
I agree with you there. Also, that comes into some potential finagling on the comp side. You know, you can probably get a 3rd-round comp pick for Chris Harris Jr. Maybe you want to go after a street free agent, a guy who was released, and sign him and recoup that comp pick for 2021, which, you know, again, you need all those picks you can get until you find your quarterback. So that's something I would be interested in as well. So I guess moving on now because we're running a little bit long, and we probably should save our last topic for another time, Carl, because that's how we do. But any free agents that you're looking at right now? I guess I'll go with – you have a more top list than I do. For me, this is going to sound kind of boring, but I'm really interested in some of these Bears cap casualties. The Bears are up against it as far as the cap goes next year, even with that rookie contract, and they might be looking to shed some salary. So that could be a guy like Danny Trevathan. You know, I'm fine with Alexander Johnson and Todd Davis, but Danny Trevathan is one you might look into there. A little bit more athletic upside than Todd Davis in coverage. But really it comes more to some positions that I think the Broncos need to look at more so in defensive line, cornerback, and wide receiver. And that is Prince Amukamara, cornerback, former first-round pick. Fits this scheme, obviously, pretty well and might be released by the Bears, could be brought in here, wouldn't affect the comp picks. A guy like Taylor Gabriel, who I love in this scheme, did really well with Kyle Shanahan in Atlanta. A vertical speed stretcher who can do the pre-snap motion and as well play slot at a very high level. Move those safeties back, cover two killer in that regard. And then Akeem Hicks is probably the guy that I'm really the most interested in. Bears will probably figure out a way to keep him, but if they don't, he's one I am doing jumping jacks to go after. Other guys who are potential street free agents that really intrigue me, one in particularly is Calais Campbell. He's been edge rusher. He's kind of a hybrid because he's so big, but he almost signed with Denver 3 seasons ago, I believe it was now. Maybe a chance to come finish his career. He played in Denver in high school. Maybe a chance to come finish his career back in this state.
Yeah, all good. I did go a little bit crazy. I went for some big names that the odds of Broncos signing any of them are pretty slim. Most of them probably will be re-signed by their own teams. I'm just kind of looking at just what I would want to add to the team. I mean, Amari Cooper. I know a lot of people have been really high on Jerry Jeudy of Alabama. Yeah. And Amari Cooper, they're kind of almost clones in a lot of what they bring to the table. But if you could get Amari Cooper and then draft a left tackle, I think that entire offense just explodes. If you could do something like that, if you could pair those two together. But the odds of the Cowboys letting Amari Cooper go is pretty slim. And then another guy that I know you're really high on because he is your Iowa boy, Brandon Scherf. I mean, this might be my top guy that I'd love to see come into the Broncos. And I do think a little bit, just because of the whole chaos that is the Redskins, it'll be interesting to see if he's even willing or wanting to re-sign with them. Now, I know they could tag him, so, I mean, he might not be able to get away from them even if he wants to. But if he can hit the open market, I think the Broncos should go pretty crazy. I know right now for the offensive line, I think Broncos are bottom 10 in how much they've actually spent on their offensive line. And so it's a position that I think they could go spend some, and especially if you're going to have a rookie or a second-year quarterback as your top guy, you want to get as good of an offensive line in front of him as you can. That's why I have 2 offensive linemen here, Andres Pete as well from New Orleans, who might have the best offensive line in football. Yeah, you get one of those guys to come in there and fill in that right guard spot. I really think that interior, especially if you can re-sign McGovern or bring in a guy in the mid rounds for the Broncos, I think you can really do a lot of good things for this offensive line. And then, of course, another one of your boys. Man, I like your boys, I guess. Chris Jones.
That is my boy.
Yeah. He's going to demand a lot of money, and he's earned every penny of it. I mean, you add him to the defensive line, forget about it. I mean, Vaughn, Chubb, Chris Jones, those 3 combined together, good luck to any quarterback out there. There's no escaping the pressure. You can't step up in the pocket. You can't get around the edge. There's nowhere to go. You bring in those 3 guys, and you could have an average secondary and know that you're still going to have a very, very strong defense. And my final guy, I mean, you've talked about him before, Byron Jones. Again, just gives another really nice piece to the Broncos secondary, a guy that you can move around, play a lot of matchup football, and has that athleticism that you're really looking for to be able to cover some of these really athletic wide receivers in the league. And so I know all these guys are pretty big dreams to be able to come to the Broncos, and I know it probably destroys any kind of comp picks that the Broncos would want to get. But I also think that you add some kind of amazing piece like this, it really just bolts up the Broncos to a whole new level of what you're looking at and the expectations of the Broncos moving forward.
Yeah, I agree with you. One I want to throw out there that I've heard brought up a bunch is Anthony Costanzo. I'm just very skeptical he hits the market. You know, a still in his prime left tackle who is league average. I mean, we saw what Nate Soldier got paid. And I think it's going to be very similar if the Colts even let him go, which I don't think they will. So that's a name that everybody's, just move on from Bulls and sign Anthony Costanzo. I think that's very similar to, just move on from whoever the heck it was, Donald Stevenson, Russell Okung, and sign Nate Soldier, who goes on and gets paid the highest left tackle money of all time, despite playing below average, honestly, since that contract. So a little bit of skepticism and concerns there. So thoughts on that? I'm kind of surprised that he didn't, or you didn't bring him up.
Well, I thought about it, but like you said, the odds of him leaving and also just the contract, a little bit for me is just the draft and looking at how good of a tackle draft this is. Yeah. It's hard for me to want to go spend money on an average tackle when I feel like I can get a better piece on a rookie contract in the draft. And so I'd rather fix that right guard or center position than I would left tackle just because of the strength of the draft.
Yeah. No, I'm in agreement with you there. So we should probably take a break, folks. We will be right back for the last segment. Do not go anywhere.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
Alrighty, and we are back on the Building the Broncos podcast. I'm Nick Kendell, along with my good friend and co-host Carl Dumler. Looking at the roster right now, we're going to look at just kind of going forward, a little bit of a preemptive for the 2020 offseason. But currently, and Carl, I want you to take into account also the way the contracts are, guys that are about to hit free agent, young players up and coming, et cetera, et cetera. The top 3 positions of strength on this Denver Bronco roster going forward. Not just for the rest of the season, but how this roster projects 2020, 2021, 2022.
Well, I guess when you word it that way, you got to like where the edge rusher is. I mean, when you get Bradley Chubb back with Von Miller and now an emerging Malik Reed, that is 3 players that could be starting pretty much on any team, with 2 of them being absolutely elite. And so you got to start with that position. I went into this with the idea that also that Justin Simmons is being re-signed because I just don't see how the Broncos are letting him go.
He's either re-signed or he's being tagged.
Exactly.
He's not going anywhere.
So he's going to be on this roster in 2020. And so when the Broncos have 2 players that are top 5 at their position, it's obviously a position of strength. Now, you do worry a little bit about the players below them because Will Park's most likely gone and things like that. But I still think it's a position that you can view as a strength and one that you can still add a lot of pieces to, that I feel very good about this coaching staff coaching up any kind of rookies or anybody else that they bring in at the position. So it's still a huge position of strength right now. And then my final one out of the top 3, and it's defensive line. And I know, again, this is where I guess I'm projecting a little bit that I think Wolf's going to be back. You already said he loves Denver. He loves being a Bronco. And so I think they're going to figure out a way to get him back. And you combine him with Mike Purcell's going to be there again. You got Walker, who's emerged this year. You got the rookie that has actually shown up pretty decently at times. And so I think for the most part, that's a pretty strong unit that has a lot of versatility. I mean, you're still going to need to add more to it. Obviously, they're still needing a lot more depth as they move into next year, with losing probably Shelby Harris and losing Gotsis as well. But beyond that, I think you're seeing a lot of these young guys emerge where it's actually become a very big position of strength for this roster, where a lot of us were questioning whether it'd be a liability this year.
Interesting. I don't know if I agree, as we'll see going forward. For me, number 1, edge rusher. You talked about it. It's not only is it Chubb and Vaughn, but Malik Reed playing as one of the better edge rushers and rookie edge rushers in football, especially in this scheme. And, credit to those scouts and the Broncos also for bringing him in, and the coaching staff for putting him in a position to succeed. He's played really well. And Justin Holland's shown some flashes. So edge rusher, I think, is probably the best there. Safety is next for me. Obviously Justin Simmons is emerging as one of the best young safeties in football. Kareem Jackson playing really well here, at least another season. And maybe even Chris Harris Jr. after that. So you got to like that as well. And then my last one, running back. I know Booker's going to be heading on, but when you have 2 young guys for 2 more years on their rookie contracts for so cheap, and Phillip Lindsay and Royce Freeman, that's pretty darn solid. So obviously you'd love to have maybe somebody a little bit more dynamic than Royce Freeman, maybe a better true receiving type of back out there. But I feel pretty solid considering the payment and return for a running back. So any other positions there that you think may be worth a shout out? Honestly, I'm going to throw one out there, and it's kind of a short-term one, but is off-ball linebacker deserving of at least a mention? I mean, Todd Davis is playing really well. They have him on a decent contract. He is the brains of this operation, at least on the field. AJ Johnson, playing really, really well. And then for depth, you can do worse than Josie Jewell as your first backup and out there for special teams and whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, that was another position I was thinking about putting on here. I mean, it's still a little bit of a limited position because you have more run stoppers than you do pass coverage guys. But even there, they've actually stepped up quite a bit in pass coverage because the Broncos are playing up to a strength in how they cover. And so, I mean, I guess you should be able to view it, especially in terms of this defense. I mean, if you look at overall talent, if you stuck those guys on some other teams and what they ask their linebackers to do, they would be a huge liability.
Yeah.
And so it's always interesting how that works, where a player can fail at another place. I mean, just look at Devontae Harris. Failed on the worst team in football, comes to the Broncos and looks like a potential playmaker moving forward. So they definitely deserve a shout out. I am interested, just because I'm looking at your list here. You and I have a huge disagreement on one of our evaluations here.
Yeah.
And so I guess explain to me why you view defensive line as a weakness more than a strength like I view it.
Well, it just has to do with how many guys are moving on. I mean, you have your top 2 starters set to hit free agency, and Shelby Harris and Derek Wolfe, obviously, and no guarantee they'll bring him back, obviously, until they do. It's a question mark. And I think that Purcell is solid, but not great. I mean, you'd like a little bit more dynamicism there, or dynamic ability there. And then is Walker really great as a starter? I'm doubtful there, and same with Jones. So I had debated back and forth here between defensive tackle and cornerback, as well as interior offensive line as the needs, because I think the top 2 needs are pretty darn obvious. And wide receiver 2 is another one out there that might be there. But defensive tackle, just in the end, I have to tip my cap there. That's something I think that defensive line depth is just more of a question mark at this point than what I'm feeling with some other positions on this team, and I think more valuable.
Yeah. And I guess because I'm operating in the idea that Wolfe is back.
That changes things, just like Chris Harris Jr. being back would change things.
Right, you're right. So I guess that's a little bit of me projecting what's going to happen for the Broncos this year.
Yeah.
I understand what you're saying. If Wolfe and Harris are both gone, then yes, defensive tackle becomes a huge need for this team. And I mean, because they really wouldn't have a true starter left on the roster. I know Mike Purcell, I guess, could be ranked as a starter, but still nose tackle, a run-stuffing nose tackle is very limited in what they bring to the roster. It's still important, but it's not the most important. And so then I guess switching over then to the weakness side of things, I mean, I think we're both completely in agreement on the top 2, tackle and quarterback. I mean, I know there's going to be a lot of people who are like, well, we have Brandon Allen and we have Drew Lock, but they're both still complete unknowns. And really the quarterback position, until you fully know, I mean, you could project and say Drew Lock is the next Aaron Rodgers, but until he actually shows it on the field, that's just words that mean nothing really. And while I think Drew Lock has a huge chance to be successful in this league, there's still a lot of questions to his game. There's a reason that he fell to the second round.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a reason all 32 teams were willing to pass on this guy at one point. And it is. It's definitely a position of huge question mark. Hopefully he can prove something over the final 4 or 5 games of the year to eliminate that as a huge need for this team or a huge weakness. But and then, of course, tackle. I mean, Juwan James, if he's healthy, I think he can be a true starter for this team, but it still leaves that left tackle spot with maybe the biggest hole on the entire roster. Yeah. And it's just this vortex that's sucking everything into it. And I think a little bit for Bowles, it is just because there's been such a negative response to him for a long time now, that every little thing that he does wrong gets blown up, but he's still terrible. So, I mean, it doesn't take away from how much he is stunk. And again, just to show a little bit of just the other side of PFF, he's ranked as the top offensive lineman for the Broncos this year.
Yeah, that's questionable.
Yes.
Questionable at best. So, yeah, I definitely agree with you. Wide receiver is the other one you have listed here, and I do think that, I mean, I've obviously been a big wide receiver proponent, but the thing with me and wide receiver is just the target share. You know, when you have a guy like his name keeps escaping me now, Deshaun Hamilton out there playing, 60 snaps in the last 2 weeks and one target. I mean, how much is there for volume that they can actually utilize that wide receiver? You know what I'm saying? Like, is there passing volume for him, or is this a team that's going to be more run centric, and you need to focus more on quarterback, offensive line, and defense than that next wide receiver? Because just Sutton's eating so much, Fant's eating a lot, and how much they're throwing to the running backs, which is honestly a big surprise for me. I've been calling for it, but I just don't know if either Royce Freeman or Phillip Lindsay have shown enough to warrant so much volume.
Right. I guess it is a little bit, if you actually get a true playmaker there, it changes how you attack teams.
Yeah.
And so you add a Jerry Jeudy or a CeeDee Lamb or a Henry Ruggs to that side. I mean, it really changes how you're going to game plan, how teams are going to have to defend you. I mean, it might not be that they're going to get 10 targets, but because they are opening things up for everybody else, especially the run game and they're still a very valuable piece.
Yeah.
Where right now teams are like, okay, you got Cortland Sutton and who? Like I said, Deshaun Hamilton, you're having a little trouble even remembering his name. That's usually my job, not yours. Yeah. But it's still very frustrating that they're not getting anything open. Now, this last game, I got to give it the fact that, I mean, having a first-time starter, of course, he's going to be going to his top targets.
Yeah.
And not looking the other way. I still think Hamilton has times where he's getting open and the quarterbacks are just not looking his way. Now, some of that's on him for not catching the football when it has been thrown his direction. But it's still a huge void on this team that's, I think, really holding back this offense from really taking that next step.
Yeah. I guess even going a little deeper with that, Emmanuel Sanders. He was becoming the number 2 target in this offense, and they weren't really utilizing him. And, well, not really not utilizing him, but they didn't have the volume to go around. So I guess it comes back to obviously getting that wide receiver that you love, that wide receiver 2 that complements Sutton, or doesn't even complement Sutton that much, just another good dynamic guy out there that can make plays. That does have value, but how much value does it provide until you have baseline quarterback / pass blocking? I guess that's what it comes down to for me.
Yeah, and that's why, of course, I have tackle and quarterback above it.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, I mean, you got to get those 2 positions figured out before you ever get wide receiver figured out. And,
it just feels a little bit luxury.
It does. And that's where that's where I was a little frustrated. I loved DT and I love Sanders. But when you don't have a quarterback to throw it to him or an offensive line to block, it doesn't make much sense to go pay those guys top wide receiver money. And that's where the Broncos have been the last few years, of paying wide receivers, but having nobody to throw it to them.
Yeah.
And so it's just kind of like having a Ferrari with no engine. It looks good, but it doesn't go anywhere. And that's exactly the Broncos offense. It looks good in some parts, but it's still not going anywhere. And you're right. So they have to figure out those other positions, but it also doesn't mean, let's say we get to the draft and the top couple tackles are taken. Broncos decide that Drew Lock is the quarterback that they're going to move forward with. And one of those top wide receivers is sitting there when the Broncos are picking wherever they're going to be picking. And say a guy like Jerry Jeudy's there. Well, then I'm sitting there saying, okay, maybe the value of tackle, I'm not going to reach on it because we just did that with Garrett Bowles and look where we're at. And so maybe it is one of those wide receivers is that true valuable piece there wherever the Broncos are picking. I mean, there's so much left of the season before we ever get into a lot of that kind of discussion, but it's still something to kind of consider because it still is a huge hole on this roster.
Yeah. And I mean, even let's say a guy like Henry Ruggs gets 1 target a game in your offense, just the space and threat that he makes that he could take it on any play changes how defenses attack you, changes how the boxes look, changes how the safeties have to play. So obviously more to it than the volume. It's just something that I keep circling back to with this team, considering, they had Emmanuel Sanders who goes on to San Francisco and immediately looks great. And, you have Deshaun Hamilton getting all these snaps, no targets. So I'm just curious how much of a option is there? Like how much do they need that before they have to get offensive line and quarterback to a certain level to utilize those guys?
Right.
So it's kind of a short-term versus long-term thing too.
Right. You're right.
So, all right. Well, that should probably wrap up today's episode of Building the Broncos, powered by Overtime Media. You can find Carl on Twitter at Carl Dumler MHH and myself at Nick Kendell MHH. Make sure you head on over to Mile High Huddle, an affiliate of the Maven Coalition and Sports Illustrated. Head on over to iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcasts and leave us a 5-star rating and a comment, as your support can help us continue to bring you our Denver Bronco deep dives. You can follow the Building the Broncos podcast and all our other great audio content by subscribing to the Huddle Up podcast wherever you listen to your shows. You can follow us on Twitter at Mile High Huddle and at BTB Football Pod. For Carl, I'm Nick, wrapping up another episode of the Building the Broncos podcast. We hope you guys enjoyed it, and we will see you soon. Go Broncos.
You've been listening to Building the Broncos. Join Broncos Country's deep divers at milehighhuddle.com to keep the conversation going.